Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm here with Natalie Headdings again. She is called Trainer Natalie. She is the host of the Resource Doula podcast, and she's a pre and postnatal exercise physiologist. And I'm Ruth, and I'm from the Foot Collective. I'm a foot nerd, and we are continuing our conversation on building connections between feet and hips. So I just wanted to start by just checking in for a second. Natalie and I, before we start recording, we try to talk about why are we making these discussions, and we have a similar mission, I think. And so from the Foot Collective perspective, we at the Foot Collective have a mission to help and empower people to restore their health, starting at the feet. And we acknowledge that a foot conversation or a foot health conversation is a whole body conversation and a whole health conversation, whole body health conversation. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to dig into squatting a little bit more, and we're just going to kind of see where the conversation takes us in regards to connections between feet and hips, but with an emphasis on squatting and everything that we can unpack around squatting and hips and the benefits between that and our lower body health. So with that being said, I wanted to ask Natalie to just say a little bit more about her mission and what she does, and then we'll kick off our conversation on squatting.
All right. Thanks so much for having me again, Ruth.
Yes.
I appreciate it. So when we were talking about, the Foot Collective's mission and my mission, and I feel like other people in this mindful movement space, right? Bringing things back to more simple terms and more accessible for everyone, really, because every body can move, and every body, specifically saying it that way, can choose to be more mindful in how they position themselves, whatever their level of ability. I want to emphasize that. Yeah.
I was just going to ask you to define what your definition of mindful would be.
I would say being aware of how your body is moving in relation to space and ground, and in relation to other things that you're picking up and moving. So a lot of times when we think about exercise in general, it's like we need to sweat and we need to move really fast and we need to do a certain number of reps or sets or both. And it's not successful unless we do those specific things. But my perspective is, and my mission is really getting the word that mindful movement is the way. And if we are more conscious, that's another good word to think about. If we're more conscious of how our body is traveling through space while we're on this earth, right? And we can have fun while doing it. Like if I'm aware of how I'm sitting, if I'm not slumped back and kind of sitting back on my tailbone and my shoulders are forward and down, that's also an indication of how we're feeling inside. Right? That just gives you the feeling. But if you're sitting up on your sit bones, you're stacking your ribs on top of your pelvis, you feel strong, you feel powerful, you feel like you have some sense of I can do this, I can do whatever life throws at me, right? And so mindfulness in the sense that we are aware of our own bodies, but we're also just moving intuitively, and we're not putting the pressure on ourselves to perform a certain number of specific exercises a specific way. Does that help? Is that a good definition?
Yes.
Very long-winded, but
no. I mean, that's what we're here to do, right? Is kind of break it down, kind of break things down and then build it back up, and maybe to a concept that people can feel comfortable with and brave enough to. I mean, I think courage comes into something that you're saying, right? I think we intellectualize, we might have touched on this in our last talk about intellectualizing or over intellectualizing our movement practices. And it sounds to me a lot like when you talk about mindful practice and being conscious of the way we move, I guess so for me personally, I come from a strength and conditioning background. I come from fitness background. I come from PE background. And when from my history, so I originally started in college as a PE major.
Okay.
And I remember this really specifically, right? Like I remember that PE, like physical education. And by the way, I had the best undergrad physical education degree. I don't know that I think everybody should have this degree. So we essentially played. Like I had to
Mm-hmm.
take classes called analysis of synchronized swimming, analysis of square dancing, analysis of archery,
Mm-hmm.
analysis of, and we would go to these classes and then we would have like our core classes, right? Like biomechanics and exercise physiology and anatomy and physics and chemistry and all that. But the bulk of our education was playing in PE in physical education. And then we would write lesson plans. And it was so cool because I spent 5 years of my undergrad playing basketball for college, and then doing all these other like playful activities and creating lesson plans for little kids. What I realized after I graduated was that having a PE, like I think there are like all kinds of like bullying types of things around a physical education degree back in
Mm-hmm.
the day. And I needed to like, so my program then got changed from like PE to kinesiology, and then it sounded more scientific, and then it
Yep.
was like more, so it's like in over intellectualizing what our body wants to do, which is playfully move. And so when you talk about mindful, conscious moving, and then talking about our relationship to the ground and the way we sit, it's like the more we actually allow ourselves to get out of our chairs,
Mm-hmm.
you know, get out of our shoes and play like children, which we're not
Yeah.
really honestly given permission to do.
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, I remember that like one of our when I was in the Foot Nerd program, one of the tasks in our little accountability groups were like to tell our people, our cohort, like what did we want to do that we needed support with. And I just wanted to climb a tree without feeling like a freaking weirdo, because I'm in
Yep.
my 50s, and I was like, if anybody saw me climbing a tree, I don't know if they would call me a damn fool. So I
Right.
guess
Right.
my point is that I'm getting stronger from like getting on the ground and doing experiments in ground living, like spending less time in chairs, actually taking chairs out of my, keeping chairs out of it. Like I don't have a traditional environment, so it's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of play, and I feel stronger and better. And I do think that like playful movement is mindful movement. I mean, I think those can
Yes.
marry into each other, right?
Yes, I think so. And I think there's a fine line. I was thinking about this before our interview. Like, there's a really fine line between awareness and obsession. And it's interesting because I want you to know all of the reasons why your pelvic floor matters and how the muscles interact with, ground forces and how you moves your pelvic floor. But then I want you to just move and not obsess over it and not think about it every day, because if we think about it every day, we get scared, right?
Yeah.
And we're like worried that something's going to get hurt, whatever. So it's an interesting path that I have to take my clients on, because it's like, yes, you need to know the why and the how and the reasons behind why we're moving, how we're moving. But then I just need you to move and not think too hard. Like breathe and move and have fun with it, because if you have fun, like your body relaxes, right?
We need that so bad. We need that
We
so bad.
do.
We just
We
need to
do.
freaking relax.
Yeah.
And before we go on, I wanted to ask about, who are your clients? Like, who are the people that you work with, and what are they going through? Like, I want to
Mhm.
just kind of tap into a little bit of like, what are people going through in your world? And then maybe even go into a little bit about like fear of moving, right? Because of some of the stuff that we talked about last time, if they're dealing with certain discomforts.
Yeah, yeah, totally. So I have kind of a wide range of clients. Primarily, I work with pre and postnatal women who are either preconception and or looking towards getting pregnant, moving through motherhood. I also have pregnant clients who are already pregnant and they're like, oh, I'm having back pain, or I'm having hip pain, or I'm having these issues. Or I want to prepare best for, I'm not having issues, but I want to prepare best for postpartum, make sure that everything's good before I push a baby out. And then I also have a lot of postpartum clients who have had a child. I mean, postpartum is technically forever, right? Once you've had a
Mhm.
baby, you're always postpartum, but you don't have to rehab forever. And that's a distinction that's in the postpartum exercise world that needs to be said, I think. Because we have these women like stuck doing clamshells.
What's a clamshell? Can we get?
Yeah. Like lying on your side, like classic, quote unquote PT exercise where you're lying on your side, your knees are up as if you're sitting in a chair, but you're laying down on one side and you're just lifting your knee up and lowering it back down. So
it's like the Suzanne Summers workout.
Yeah. With a little less flair, probably. So we have people like stuck in this, either lying on their back, lying on their side, or all fours, and they're doing these little movements, like micro movements, which are not bad, but shouldn't be forever, right? And we need to get them up and load them. Like motherhood, I say, is the ultimate strength workout. Like you're wrangling toddlers and you're carrying stuff, and you have to reach and pull and lift, and like it's a lot of strength. So moms
and in weird movement, in weird, like your cells get deformed, like in that Katie Bowman way, like you're carrying loads in ways that like are not how you would be taught in the gym, right? So like
exactly
upside down, backwards, up there, down there.
Yeah, if you've got to, throw your kid over your shoulder and get out of a situation, or they're just, don't want to leave the park, whatever. So moms are like primarily my clients, and then older adults as well. I see a lot of older adults. And I think I mentioned this in the last interview, but I have the ICE, the Institute of Clinical Excellence Modern Management of the Older Adult certification, which was really interesting. And it's more scientific in how we learned kind of specifically the benefits of strength training and how underdosed people are in older age, and how, like, just to bring it all together, both those populations are fearful of movement, right?
Yes.
And then on another kind of branch, my other clients are other trainers, and they're learning how to train people in a mindful movement sort of way and be aware of the pelvic floor. They're also afraid of hurting people.
Right.
Like generally, if you think about anybody who works with bodies, who doesn't have a training in pre and postnatal, they see a pregnant person and they're like, like they kind of freak out. They're like, oh my gosh, what do we do with them? Like, and then they usually end up underdosing them because they're afraid of overloading, because the whole old, like, don't lift over 25 pounds, don't do this, don't do that. Like a lot of fear-based movement instruction for pregnancy. And not so much postpartum, but there's a lot of lack of awareness of how long the body actually takes to heal. It can take up to 2 years to really heal well. And then we have these doctors prescribing, like, or not prescribing, but just releasing people at 6 weeks postpartum to go like run and have sex and do activities. And like the body is simply not ready at that point.
Yeah.
We know that soft tissue can heal, like if you tore or things like that, and your uterus comes back down to its original size around 6 weeks. So that's kind of like where that care ends. So if you see a practitioner, usually you're done with your pre and postnatal care by 6 weeks. And if you think about, my favorite example is like an ACL surgery, right? With every single ACL surgery, there's prescribed PT, like it's an automatic. They have to go to physical therapy. Like it's recommended, the doctors push it. It's really important. Everybody knows that it might take 6 to 9 months to heal. And then you push a baby out of your vagina, or you have a cesarean, which is major abdominal surgery, and you don't get an automatic referral to pelvic PT, which we talked about last time. But I think it's really, really important to have an internal exam if you're comfortable with it and consent to it and everything, to figure out how your pelvic floor is doing after the load of pregnancy for 10 months, right? Because it really is 10 months. And if you then, whatever way you give birth, like those muscles have endured some sort of like change, I guess I would say, like whether or not you tore, but you pushed baby out, like that's a lot of tension and it's a stretch injury technically. And so we need time to heal and respect that. And if you look at all other cultures, I know I'm getting off on this, but if you look at,
this is great. This is so great. I have so many questions.
Okay. If you look at a lot of other cultures, they mother the mother for a very long time and they respect that that fourth trimester, like the 3 months postpartum, as like that's sacred, and you don't get up, you don't eat cold foods, you have other people do your chores, you don't lift more than your baby, you slowly come back into society. And it's
Yeah.
like, it's praised for you to stay home and kind of like live in your own little cave for a while and bond
Yes.
with your baby and then move out, and like slowly start going back into the world. But in the US, it's like people are visiting you in the hospital. They expect to come over, the day of or the day after the baby's born and pass the baby around, and like all of these, it's not as respectful or thought of as like the mother needs a lot of bonding time and time to heal and rest and be horizontal for the pressures. Like if you think about it, if you're vertical, you have a lot more gravity on your pelvic floor versus if you're horizontal, right? So
yeah, and it's like a rite of, I mean, like you're describing something in other cultures too as like a major rite of passage, because I think that's
absolutely.
really important. One of the things that I expressed to you when we talked about having these conversations is to bring a different nuance into them, right? Like rites of passage, and yes, exercise, movement. We're here to talk about, like health, but I'm really interested in like overall health, and we can't talk about that without talking about like the effects on our spiritual, emotional, psychological health, right? And mental
Yeah.
health. And so
Yeah.
I think when we talk about what you just said, like you push, first of all, it's mind blowing if we just give ourselves 1 second, even though,
Yeah.
we're designed to do this, which is like
Yep.
push people out of the strangest place, like out of, you're like, I'm going to push a human out of my vagina,
Yep.
and then I'm going to go back to work. And like
Yeah.
the fact that we can grow organs and grow another human in our body is miraculous and
Yeah.
amazing and astonishing. We look at birds and bees and we look at nature and we're like, yeah, that's so cool. But we don't often stop. And it's no fault of our own. I mean, it's really what we are designed to do. But
Right.
then afterwards, right, there's this beautiful rite of passage in other cultures where we respect not only the physical healing, but also the rite of passage of who you are as a human now. You're no
Yeah.
longer, I mean, your life is no longer your own. And I think in the United States and in like Western culture, we just have overload ourselves in, you talk about overload principles and progressive overload principles. And it's like, well, there's nothing progressive about how we treat not only our exercise programs, but when you talk about like becoming a mom, it's like, that's major. And I mean, I'm lucky to see families that have support and like
Yeah.
treat this with something that's like really a juicy part of life, and that deserves to slow down and let time stand still for a while what happens is that the mom has a chance to deal with the shock of being a mom, because I'm assuming
Right.
that is a shock at some level, no matter how well prepared you are for it.
Yeah.
The first time you're going to need a little time to adjust to
Yeah.
who you are as a person now. So we don't really talk about that very much, and that deserves some hibernation time in and of itself, let alone the physical, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think if we respected it, like if we gave moms time and took some pressure off to entertain guests or have people fly in and like visit the baby, right? It's all about visiting the baby, unless you have a really good support system and you've set boundaries in place and you've been very clear with what you need as an individual and had, freezer meals prepped and all of that kind of thing. Then I think there's just so much pressure in America to perform and show your baby off. Like even from the very beginning, the Facebook and Instagram pregnancy announcements, like go big or go home, right? Like you better have a clever way to do it. It's got to be cute, right? And then the gender reveal, like there's just so much that's put on new moms, first time parents in general, to like do these things, even though none of that really is going to support them in parenthood, right? And the things that will support them are figuring out who their true friends are and their village, their villages, and who is going to respect their boundaries and who's going to come over and bring food and clean and do the dishes and like sit there and not hold the baby or not ask to hold the baby, but really do the things that are necessary. So it's just I think it's a paradigm shift And it's slowly starting to infiltrate, I think, which is good. But what I started talking about that before, I'm trying to remember my brain waves, is that other trainers don't necessarily always see that part. And I have really the blessing of having doula experience and training experience, and was able to understand what somebody's body goes through to actually give birth, but then to heal and breastfeed too, if you choose to do that. Like, that's a ton of energy and a learning curve. It's a skill. It's not always innate, right? And so I think a lot of trainers just learn sets and reps, strength. Here's how you build muscle. Here's how you work your abs. But if they're not understanding the full life cycle of pregnancy and postpartum and healing, then they treat the female pelvis like a male pelvis. I've seen this time and time again. It's very interesting. Like female pelvis, you have 3 different holes, right? Male pelvises do not. And so the way that they take on and absorb pressure, intra-abdominal pressure, is different. The risk of pelvic organ prolapse, which we talked a little bit about last time, is higher for women. And so, regardless, women are extremely strong, probably the strongest. Like, giving birth to humans is so strong, right? But our bodies work differently. And so if we just train everybody the same, like lift that weight, hold your breath, right? All of these different bracing techniques, a lot of them work better for men versus women. And we could potentially unknowingly damage pelvic floors or increase diastasis, which is that separation down the center of the abs, if we're not careful. And a lot of times, this is changing, which is good, but the thought process in America is the compliment that you get during postpartum, you look like you never were pregnant. What is that? What is that compliment, right? We love the pregnant belly, and we take pictures of it, and we people touch it without asking all the time, but afterwards, the compliment is wow, you look like you never were pregnant. Why are we erasing that? They need time to heal. It's normal to have a belly postpartum. It's very normal. And so trainers who are preying on that, that's something that I tell clients too. If you see somebody advertising, get back, get your pre-baby body back, or bounce back, or get rid of your belly, those kinds of things, stay far away, because it shows that they don't understand how postpartum works and how postpartum healing is it's not linear, and it really requires a nuanced understanding of the female pelvis in general, and how you need to work together with pelvic PT and slowly work towards goals, and consider, like you said, the mental and spiritual aspects of that specific client in front of you. It's not a one size fits all approach. So
just touching on trainers in general, whether it, I mean, and fear, and the idea that, when we talk about trainers specifically, usually the fear is that you're going to hurt somebody, hurt the baby, hurt the mama, all the things, and you're going to be sued, and there's liability, liability fears. And one of the things that we really, the mission at the Foot Collective is to help and empower people, so that you touched on something that I think is really important, right? Which is to give people the education. I personally think that education is really power. The more that you do know, as long as it's you're not just stuck in the academic nature of things, that the more nuance you have. And I think it's a slippery slope, right? Because we over intellectualize everything. We fetishize science to a fault. And then we get so stuck in our heads that we don't actually move and do the things. But at the same time, it's if there is a nice balance, and we can really understand about what it means to educate ourselves, and then it's you learn all the rules. We'll go back to ballet, right? So you learn all the sort of classical training things to know about how the body moves and dances, and then you can dance lyrical dance, and it looks like it's this, and you have the nuance and all the little tools to be able to do those things. And I think it's the same with people and trainers. It's like, if trainers wouldn't have to be so afraid, if the goal wasn't to be responsible for the human that they're training, that we give the education and the tools, and then the person can take full responsibility for their own health and movement. And I think that's something that needs to be a paradigm shift, and something we talk a lot about at the Foot Collective is like, no, do not export your health to, and I know we talked about this a little bit before, like the physical therapist, the pelvic PT, the doctor, it's like, yes, we need support and we need exams potentially, and we need all these things, but it's not there. Nobody can know your body the way you know your body. And so all of the, health professionals around us are designed to be, I think, our team, but you trust yourself first, not only, but first.
Yeah.
And I think, so what do you think about those ideas around like the trainers, being truly, like have a legitimate fear? Because if somebody says, well, I went to that person and they hurt me. And so that just offloads responsibility, right? And I think we have an epidemic of that, of people that are not understanding where does the true responsibility lie? It's us, the individual.
Yeah. No, I agree fully. It's like you listened to my podcast and repeated back to me what I've said. I say that all the time. Education is power. Knowledge, like if you know you have options, then you have options. If you understand like some of the nuance of things, you don't have to be like an anatomy textbook, of course, right? You just have to understand like how things work in your own body. Like that's, and intuitively, sometimes you just need reminding, right? Or to hear it a different way, then that's huge. But it's an interesting conversation because like the general consumer who's looking for a trainer, it's admirable to look for someone who's an expert in something to help you move forward or make progress in your movement, whatever. But it's your responsibility to know as a consumer what sets that trainer apart. And if that trainer is taking responsibility for their practice and not just outsourcing their knowledge to whatever they learned. And like, this is no fault of trainers. I don't think, I think it's how we're taught from the very beginning. Like the certifications, like they don't really emphasize pelvic floor and feet. Like, and I see so many like Instagram videos of trainers, right? I'm like, what are you wearing on your feet? If you're wearing super thick shoes, right? It's aggravating. Like they're talking about balance. They have no authority to talk about balance with 2-inch cushioned shoes on their feet. I don't think. And I'm going to fault them for that. Right?
Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly.
That's their responsibility to know. And so like it lies on both parties, but I think knowledge on both parts just help the whole. So as a consumer, you shouldn't just outsource your movement to somebody else. You should take responsibility for that, which I think is hard to, right, to get everybody on board with, because it's easy to just go to a trainer 3 times a week and not have to think about your workouts.
Oh yeah,
like
for sure.
I ran into that a lot with training people. Like I would teach them how to make their own workouts because that's my method. I want to work myself out of a job, essentially, right? I want to train you so that you can train yourself and you have sustainability for life. I'm not going to be around 3 times a week for the rest of your life. So you better like learn this so that you can take it with you, right? And I think that idea is like foreign to a lot of us because like, or to a lot of consumers because they're used to just coming in and not thinking and having somebody else program workouts and just like going along with the motions, which is, it's a good thing they're moving, way better than not moving, right? But the understanding and knowledge for themselves has to be there and the responsibility. And then trainers, I think it's even more of a responsibility for them to learn how bodies work. And I don't remember the stat. It's like 80% of women will either have had a child at one point in their lives or will. And so that's kind of a significant amount of your population. And if you look at like personal training gyms or clientele, usually it's primarily women who are going to personal training sessions. And so it's probably, I would lay on the responsibility thick for those trainers to understand if they're not screening for incontinence, if their clients are running to the bathroom before every single session, quote, just in case, if they are like not doing the jumps, if they're not lifting as heavy as they could be, if they're not making progress when you think they otherwise should, if they're complaining about pressure, or they're not willing to tell you because they don't trust you enough to tell you that they're leaking every time they do a heavy deadlift, right? Or a squat, whatever it may be, which I know we're going to get into squatting, then that's damaging to them mentally and physically. Like, let's get them better so they can do what they want to do. And it's the trainer's responsibility to learn more of the nuanced pieces of how the postpartum or prenatal body works. So
yeah, that's a very, I mean, I'm wondering, like, I can't even imagine a trainer. I mean, maybe I'm out of touch, but like, that wouldn't even be a question that you would ask on an intake form if you were just, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. And if you're listening, school me, but it seems like in my days of strength and conditioning and training, I mean, that was not ever a consideration, and nor did anybody ever tell me that they were dealing with that. I mean, the only reason why I know that people are dealing with incontinence is because, like, at wine parties and stuff, women giggle about it, or I see those crazy, briefs in the CVS store where there's like, or the commercials where the sexy 30-something is wearing like a full-on diaper as she goes on a date. And I'm like, what's happening? Is something going on?
Yeah.
And George Clooney looking types wearing those. I'm like, whoa, what is happening? So what about men pelvis incontinence? What do you work with any of that?
I work with some men. I've worked with some men as far as pelvic floor issues. It's, I don't want to say more simple. It's more straightforward more of the time. Like, they're able to understand, engage your pelvic floor when you're lifting something heavy. Like, if they're dealing with hernias or post like prostatectomy, I think that's right, removal of your prostate, then like there's some other factors there. If you have a hernia, then you definitely have pelvic floor issues because it's mismanagement of intra-abdominal pressure. So just by learning to breathe correctly and bracing correctly when you're lifting, usually it's more straightforward and they're like, oh, cool, my issue is fixed. It seems to be a shorter term thing. And there are pelvic PTs who specifically work with men. So I can't really speak to all of the issues I don't have the knowledge to speak to them as much as I do female issues, but they're out there. And there's like, if you're a man and you're having pelvic floor issues, then that's a real thing and that's valid. And it's something to, chat with. It's difficult because PT is recommended, but typically you have to chat with your general practitioner first to get a referral, because PTs don't have the authority yet to just prescribe or, get prescribed exercise without a referral, depending on the state you're in or country you're in. But well, does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe a good segue into squatting is, what do you think so when we're talking about pelvic floor issues with men and women and pre and postnatal bodies and that sort of thing, what do you think, like, effect does sitting have to do with, we talked about like what women are doing when they're when they come to you before preconception, they want to get ready, or during pregnancy or after pregnancy. Like, how about sitting, like, and the effect on the pelvic floor and like all the stuff, and then maybe we can take our way into squatting practices and such.
Yeah. I mean, it has a lot of effects, as you know, as probably many of our watchers. Question. It really is. Yes. It's not great for the pelvic floor to sit more of the time than not. And I kind of hold like a middle ground approach. Like, relax on your couch if you want to, like, enjoy your life, but don't live there. Right. Like, if you want to.
Do you think people live on their couches?
It depends. I think sometimes, yes.
Because I do, like, with my family members live on their couches.
Yeah. I think moms don't typically, because they're
Right,
usually
right, right.
very busy, right? And
Yeah.
they're running around after their kids all the time. I think more significant on their pelvic floor is the way that they stand, because they're
Okay.
usually tucked under with the tailbone and they're
Yep.
pushing their hips out to the side to hold a kid and make a shelf for the kid on their hip, right?
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
so they're not stacked or aligned as well as they could be, and tucked under. But I think sitting and driving, moms drive a lot too. Parents drive
Yeah.
a lot, right? If you're taking your
Which you,
kids.
yeah, and you accumulate a lot of sitting time when you don't realize it, like
Yes,
in cars and such. So
totally. And
yeah.
if you work a desk job, like that's 8 hours a day of sitting in a chair in a 90, 90, 90, 90, right? Like, so your ankles, your knees, your
Yep.
hips, like everything is in one position. You're assuming one shape with your body for and Katie Bowman talks about this. I know we mentioned her all the time, but
I know.
she's like my
We love
spirit
Katie
animal.
Bowman. I know, me too. I love her.
So if we are sitting more of the time than not, and we're not aware of how we're sitting, if we're slumped back or tucked under, then that really, I have Polly here, it really shortens, right? Our sacrum actually tucks under and it shortens the distance between our tailbone and our sit bones and pulls tension to the back of the pelvic floor versus the front. And we end up with more incontinence usually, and lack of ability to squat. So also when you're sitting, right, our hamstrings tighten up, and your hamstrings directly attached to the sit bones.
Yep.
So if you are like trying to squat down, right, and you're trying to get into that deep, deep squat without any support system or cushions underneath you, oftentimes what we see is like you can get fairly low, like almost parallel to the ground with your thighs, right? But then what happens? The lower back starts to round, and your chest, you basically fold your upper body forward because you feel like you're going to fall backwards because your ankles cannot get anywhere between. I'm like, which direction is best for visualizations? Your ankles are stuck at 90 from sitting in that position, and your shin can't move forward into more of a dorsiflexion, right? I always confuse those. I don't know why. Dorsiflexion, plantar flexion.
Because
But
it's confusing.
yeah. Dorsal, fin.
Yep. Yes, exactly.
But if your ankles don't have the mobility because you're stuck in that position because of shoes or because of sitting in one position for a long time, then your squat is going to be disturbed from that. Like your squat is going to be altered. And so then what happens is the ankles pop up or the heels pop up off the ground, right, to accommodate for a deeper squat, but we're still tucked way under because the hamstrings are pulling the pelvis this way because they're attached to those sit bones. And so I think just in general, like for anybody of any age, if you sit a long time during the day, hours and hours, then your squat is going to be changed. Yeah.
So let's dig into like the benefits. Like why do we want, like, and maybe take me through like some samples of like what you do with people and what it would be like to work with you, and what are the benefits for, like, what do you tell people, like why would a deep squat, I mean in a resting squat where your bum is below your hips, right? So, or below your thighs.
Yeah.
So we're talking about like a deep resting squat, feet as close to parallel as possible and maybe 2 fists distance apart, or any deep squat where your booty is below your thighs.
Right.
So let's talk about like the benefits of that, kind of like like a sample of your teaching and that, let's go down that path for a little bit.
Okay. Yeah. So the deep squat is essential for life. I feel like for resting in general. I mean, it sounds silly to explain it because it's like, of course you want to be able to get near the ground without kneeling down necessarily. You want to be able to kneel down also, but like if you need to quick grab a toddler or come down to their level and look them in the eyes and not bend over, right? Because that's necessary. They need to see you at their level, right? If you want to pick up your grandkid, that's a huge, huge motivator for a lot of my older adult clients because they want to be strong for their grandkids and they want to be able to participate in activities, and which is like it's the sweetest thing ever. It makes me want to cry because it's like that is really the goal, to keep your mobility alive for your entire life and not not lose it, because when you lose your mobility, you lose your quality of life.
Yeah.
And I think that applies to anybody who's not a grandparent too, right?
Right.
Like if you lose your mobility, if you can't squat down on the floor for longer than 5 seconds, or your heels pop up and you feel like you're going to fall over and it's really uncomfortable, or your legs go numb, like all of those things, then you're probably not on the ground as much as you could be, which reduces your strength in your hips, your ankles, your knees, your quads, your calves, like all of it, your whole lower body and your core too. So it's just like it's a natural movement that our bodies are designed to be able to do. And so it's beneficial in so many ways. And then also, this is a great thing to talk about, because my prenatal clients, they need to be able to squat. You know what is a really, really, really natural birthing position? The squat, the deep squat. And if you can't do that during pregnancy, then you might be limited in your options for birthing. Now, and this is like a huge discussion, but I'll try to stick to our path, because if we can't deep squat, right, and you can't get a little bit different positions of your pelvis, and squatting, like, it doesn't have to be one static position. Right. You can kind of lean over to one side. You could stick a leg out. You could be in like a half kneeling, deep squat kind of position, right? Just ground movement in general allows your pelvis to move. Okay. And then, oh, look what I brought today. Baby.
Oh.
So if you think about the pathway of the baby through the pelvis, right? They first, ideally they're head down, but if they're not, variation of normal, get a provider that supports breech, vaginal birth, if that's your jam. To be able to get into the top of the pelvis, like they need the most, like the path of least resistance, right? Your psoas runs through here. If you're scared, if you're worried, your psoas is like a thick steel rope, like blocking the way. Also, this is considered the pelvic inlet, this whole, right? Which direction opens it up? Here, here. If we can actually tuck our tailbone and open our knees wide, so that's like the deep resting squat where you're tucking under with your tailbone a little bit, that gives you the most circumference to get a baby in. So early labor, if you leave a woman undisturbed during labor, she'll do that naturally. She will do positions that open the top of her pelvis to get her baby down, like instinctively without thinking about it. But I do explain this to my clients because our heads get in the way of labor a lot. And so if we don't understand why we're doing what we're doing, or like labor happens and it's like, oh shoot, what was I supposed to do? It can be helpful to go back, like, this is the reasoning why, get into these positions, and generally they're more comfortable anyways. So trusting your body is, a big thing. So you get your baby in. This is like one of my favorite things to teach in the world. You get your baby in to the pelvis, and then they reach these spines. And if you're not watching, I apologize, but there's some bony protrusions inside the pelvis. And once a baby reaches that, they consider the baby's head to be, quote unquote, engaged. And then they make all of these different, I believe there's 7 turns that they make to get out of the pelvis, which is just fascinating and wild. But they have to turn vertically. I'll move my hand. So this way. Okay. So in order to do that, ideally there's more room up and down, like from the pubic joint to the tailbone of the pelvis. Like there's more wiggle room that direction. And so middle labor, I guess I should say, after the baby's head is engaged, then you want like alternating asymmetrical movements of the hips. So like the runner's lunge type of position, or like half kneeling on the bed with a ball, those kinds of things, putting a foot up on a step, swaying, like those kinds of movements. Again, people will do them intuitively without thinking about it if they're left to their own devices, because it's more comfortable, obviously, because there's a baby head in your pelvis, right?
You're like, I'm about to shoot a human.
Yes. So, and also we know that if you have freedom of movement in labor, things go faster, smoother, better. Great. So then you're crowning, you want to push a baby out of your pelvis, right? Instead of the classic spread eagle position, which you're on your back, and this is even hard to demonstrate because it smushes this doll's head, right? If you're on your back and you're immobilizing your tailbone, right? and you're spreading your knees wide, it actually closes down the pelvic outlet and makes a smaller hole essentially for your baby to come through. And thankfully, babies' heads are really moldable and babies are born this way all the time. But typically, something has to give. And usually it's your perineum, your tissue, and you tear more often than not. So simply by going on your side or going on all fours, you give room for that sacrum. It's like already coming out more easily, this baby, to move this direction. And there's something called the fetal ejection reflex. It's pretty awesome. Some people feel it, some people don't. It's essentially when the baby just shoots out. The sacrum lifts up and it's like exit time, right? But look at how much easier this doll is like moving through the pelvis in that position. And then what you can do is this position moves, so knees inward, ankles out, moves the sit bones out to the side and gives you way more room. So even if you did that on your back and you bring your knees together instead of wide, like the traditional, what we think of like Hollywood, right?
Yeah.
Then you give yourself the most bony room so that your tissue doesn't have as much strain. So it's just like it's a paradigm shift in how we think about birth. Movement.
Which is ridiculous if you think about it. It's like a paradigm shift to what? Back to like just trusting our bodies to something that is like so natural.
Yeah.
And it brings it back to like, I mean, that was an amazing demonstration. I hope that if you're listening to this, that you go to the YouTube and watch it because it's really cool.
Yeah.
But also the fact that variation, right? Like we have these like amazing hip sockets, ball and socket joints, the largest in the body, that do all of these things, and we do ourselves a disservice, especially as women who are going to give birth at some point, possibly, that you could be just doing all the different variations of movement within the hip socket is going to only make that better and juicier. And you know, we come back to the SAID principle, right, with specific adaptation to impose demands. So I mean, that was just a wonderful demonstration of like what the pelvic floor and the hip sockets, the hardware and the software can do together in order to create this, you know, amazing natural thing that our bodies are designed to do. I think that is really cool.
Yeah. And it brings it back to like, if we're not moving well before because we're scared, we're holding things tight, then birth, I mean, hormones are amazing during birth and they change your tissue to be like really soft and mobile. But if you're not familiar, like muscle memory of those movements and deep squats, and like I have all of my clients practice those during pregnancy. So they know exactly what to do during, and their bodies are like, oh yeah, I've done this before. But if you've been sitting in a chair for your entire pregnancy and not exploring those movements, then you're going to have probably a more challenging time assuming those positions during labor. Like labor is a really big strength workout also. Like a Spartan race, honestly. People say it's a marathon, but it's more than that. So like if we think about that in terms of like the simplicity factors, just move your body. Like, right? And explore and trust yourself to know what is going to be beneficial for you. Right? And there's a difference in learning. Like I also instill this in all of my clients. Like there's a difference in negative pain and soreness, muscle soreness and work. And a lot of people don't know the difference when they start out. And I think
that goes back to like our discussion on pain previously, right? Is that we don't have a good relationship with pain as a useful signal.
Exactly. So if we can't differentiate like, oh, that's uncomfortable versus, ooh, that's like a nerve pain, right? We need to learn that. And that's more of the mindful movement and coming back to play and exploring how your body works. And then if you're doing that, if you're running around with your kids and you're squatting and you're like crawling on the ground, your labor is probably going to go like better than if you had been sitting in a chair for most of your pregnancy. So it's just an interesting, like this fear of pregnant women and what we should do with them and how we should train them and how much they can lift. Right. And then like that directly translates into birth and how much we value moms and in our culture and allow them to go through this huge shift, like not only physically, but mentally and spiritually. And I had another thought that I was going to add on to that, but it's
Well,
just, it's all connected.
yeah, and maybe we can just shift from like squatting. So that was a wonderful demonstration about like getting your hips ready, and then like the useful positions while birthing, with the hips can
Mm-hmm.
do everything they're designed to do, and the pelvic floor can do what it does, along with our amazing pharmacy in our brains. And then how about after pregnancy? So what do you see like in your clients after pregnancy, and then like how do you get them? We'll just talk about like squatting benefits, and like maybe what do you do with somebody who maybe didn't have the luxury of seeing somebody like you beforehand, and then had maybe a very challenging pregnancy, and then wants to, restore their health of their hips and their feet after pregnancy. Maybe we can go touch on that a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Everybody starts with retraining because our minds need to disassociate from this is how we do exercise, A, B, and C, right? And we relearn how to stand, how to stack our pelvis underneath our rib cage so that our pelvic floor works better. Untuck your tailbone, essentially. Move that booty back as much as you can. And many people are surprised that they're tucked under.
Yeah.
So just that body awareness is where we start with everybody during pregnancy and postpartum, even if they haven't seen me during pregnancy. And then you work on breathing, right? And then you work on coordinating that breath with movement. And squatting can be really helpful. Like it moves your pelvis and it creates more blood flow to the pelvic floor. So it is one of the earlier exercises that we do early postpartum. Like, and this is all, I can't provide specific advice. So if you're listening, you're 6 weeks postpartum, whatever, right? Don't necessarily take what I say as your truth, but most of the time you can start breathing the day after you give birth, right? You can start intentionally breathing. You can do little bridge positions. The first, second week, you can work on leg lifts while you're side lie nursing your baby. Or you're resting in bed. You can do a bunch of different things. And squatting is in those first 6 weeks. You start moving your body in that way. And then you just to kind of restore like head to toe movement. Toe to head,
Yeah, whole body,
like the whole body movement,
the whole unit, right? We often
yep.
We forget that like that it goes back to like playing and recognizing that you're like one unit. Everything is intimately related and connected, and like usually if my shoulders feel tight or my hips feel tight and I just start to spiral around or like do things that aren't in my linear thinking mode,
Right.
you start to feel better everywhere. It's all connected.
Yes. Yeah, totally. And that's one of the first exercises you do standing up because you're against gravity. And so it integrates your breath and your movement and your hips and everything and getting things back. And I would say this too for the older adult, like someone who's not even postpartum, is learning to squat and resist gravity. How many times a day do you sit in a chair and get down and get back up into that chair, right?
Yep.
That we start with sit to stands. It's essentially what that is.
Yep.
And you repeat that, and then you slowly add load, speed, reps, and you get stronger and stronger as you go. And then you take away the chair when you can balance, right? And then you get deeper and deeper into that. So organizing my brain. When postpartum, you slowly work up to that. People are going to be carrying their babies around anyway. So, and they're probably going to be squatting to pick something up off the ground. Why not make it mindful and integrate the breathing into it so that their core is working how it should and can help with the healing after birth? And then in the older adult population, right? Like, oh my goodness, if you are not able to get out of a chair without using your arms, you're living, and this I take from the ICE group of PTs, you're living at your 1 rep max. It's called 1 rep max living, which if you're doing a 1 rep max, it's like how much can you lift doing only 1 rep, right? And so people test that and they add more and more load until they only get 1 rep, and they can't do another one. If the 1 rep is you getting out of a chair and your own body weight, How are you going to carry a laundry basket? How are you
Mhm.
going to walk with your grandchild? How are you going to pick groceries up and walk with them 20 feet from your car to the house or whatever it may be,
Mhm.
or the
Mhm.
grocery store to your car, right? And so the goal is to increase that 1 rep max so that their daily activities are way below that. So you're
Mhm.
much stronger, right? And you regain your mobility and you can go up
Yeah.
and down stairs really well. And the whole phenomenon, like buy a ranch house when you get old so that you don't have stairs,
Yeah.
right?
Oh yeah, I live in a condo complex. I talk about that. People are probably tired of hearing me talk about this, but we live upstairs. Like all the people who are younger and can negotiate the stairs live
Mm-hmm.
upstairs, and the more expensive condos are downstairs because that's where all the older people live that are fall risks.
Yep.
And so yeah, it's the most bizarre thing about the negotiating stairs,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah. I think, and obviously you have to start early. Like if you're a very high fall risk and you're
Right.
going to break your hip if you just try stairs, like that's not the place to start,
No,
right?
no,
Caution is advised, but
yes.
really making sure that you're strong enough to do those things will allow you to keep doing those things. Like I like to use my grandpa as an example. He lives in a 3-story house. He's 98 and he goes
Amazing.
up and down the stairs, and he recently started a new exercise routine of walking on his treadmill 30 minutes every day. And I can tell that he's stronger in his normal everyday life because he's been doing those things. Like he
Yeah,
is mobile and he's independent. And that's a huge thing too. I mean,
yeah,
for Americans, right? We don't have the
right,
multi-generational homes anymore. And so
right.
independence is a big thing for older adults, and being able to live in their own house and take care of themselves and all of
Mhm.
that. And so if you can just get like, strength is one of the biggest factors for life.
Yeah,
I mean, every stage of life, but
yeah,
like you were saying, you can get stronger through play. And I
yeah,
think that's the message that everyone needs to hear, because
yeah.
if we just get on the ground and back up and back down and
Yes.
have a contest, how many different ways can you get
Oh
down
my
on the ground and
gosh.
back up again? Like,
That's like that's an interesting thing because I work in a Pilates studio, and recently we incorporated balance, foot, and hip training
ooh, nice.
into like reformer classes.
Yeah.
And so I have been noticing this is very interesting because like people in their 50s who are actually pretty, you would say would be pretty fit
Hmm.
individuals. Like there's a couple people who like bike long distances daily, and but you can watch somebody walk and see what their balance is like. And
Absolutely.
even though you are very good at riding a bike or driving your car or whatever, like it's very interesting to watch those people try to get down on the ground and get up. So one of the parts of
Hmm.
the class is exactly what you're saying. Like I want you to get down on the ground, try to use as little help and assistance from your hands as possible, and then
Hmm.
see if you can get down on the ground and get up 5 different ways, using 5 different creative ways of getting up and down. And
Yep.
it is shocking to see the lack of mobility in people and strength in people's
Hmm.
hips. And so I think like that is such a very interesting way. And personally, instead of like teaching the squat, um, now I don't deal with pre and post natal populations, but just like having people get up and down off of the ground will juicify or buttery up those hips in the way that you were showing with poly the
Hmm.
pelvis, right? So like, and people are surprised, they surprise themselves
Yeah.
about how hard
Oh,
it is.
yes.
They're
Yes.
stepping on a balance beam, negotiating balance and then getting up and down off the ground, and then how little their hips actually move in a healthy way. So I've actually stopped teaching the squat because people kind of know what they're supposed to do in the squat.
Hmm.
And then you don't get as much information as like watching them get up and down off of the ground. You can get a lot of
Absolutely.
information from that.
Yes.
Um, yeah. So
Yeah.
I love the game. Yeah, like what you're saying. It is playful. You can see people just like when they get on a balance beam,
Hmm.
because our brain prioritizes stability, right? Like
Yes.
if our brain is like, if you're not stable, we're learning very quickly on how to get stable. It's like
Hmm.
glucose priority, you know?
Yep.
So like, and so the same look in people's eyes when I ask them to get up and down off the ground, it actually makes me want to cry a little bit, because here a couple of things happen. You see the childlike innocence come back into their eyes when they
Yep.
no longer care about the reps or what they're supposed to be doing, when they
Right.
when they get on the beam and they're like, this is so much harder than I thought it was going to be. And they want to nail it. They want to get up there and they won't listen to you anymore. Like,
Yeah, they
like,
stop listening.
I just stopped talking because it just speaks for itself. And then the
Yep.
other thing, so that's a beautiful part. And the sad part for me comes when I watch people try to get up off the ground and they surprise themselves that they can't. And there's something so human that happens, like a disappointment or a fear, like, oh my gosh. But it's motivating. Like I see them motivated to talking about older people who have grandkids and that motivation to stay alive, because not to get all deep and shit, but like seriously,
Sure,
like,
do it.
when we stop, when we're not able to move freely, I mean, it's kind of a little bit of a death drive. You start to get slower and slower and slower. And what is that? But it's like, eventually you're just not going to be able to move and the body's going to be like, we're done,
Yeah.
you know? And the sad thing is that you don't die. You just live a freaking low quality life for as long as possible, having somebody have to take care of you. So I think there is something that people are wanting to live more. And I think we can help people to drift away from the intensity and the like kind of like militant style of exercise reps, and teach people, like you were saying, in a simple way about like what we're designed to do and how like we don't have to be afraid of it. You just have to go slow. That's another thing. Like, we're impatient, right? We live in a car culture where we move so fast and we expect things immediately. You can have something delivered from Amazon in 2 hours or next day. And it's not
For Alaska, it's a little bit longer, but
that's another podcast. We're going to talk about that.
Yes.
But the idea that we don't give ourselves nearly enough time, whether it's a new mom or a body adapting to new inputs, you've taken a really long time to get stuck in your pelvis and in your hips and in your feet. You've been wearing shoes that have been cramping your feet for a really long time, not even maybe aware that your feet are supposed to be widest at their toes, because nobody ever really taught us that. And so it took that long to form that body. It's going to take some time to like loosen it up. And I think patience and play and time, is like the key. So I see that we are pushing our time here, but I definitely think we're going to get to talk some more about other stuff, but maybe we could just wrap it up today by coming back to just bringing everything back to like, I wanted to hear your thoughts about this, because I don't get to talk to people very often about in depth about these cool things. And so the Foot Collective, the acronym for the Foot Collective is TFC, but our value acronym is truth, fun, and community. And I just wanted to kind of tie that all into what we're talking about, because we started to touch on it a little bit with like moms and rites of passage and time for healing, but like, how do those values of truth, fun, and community play into your ideas of like overall health? You can take that anywhere you want to go.
Oh man, I feel like they're perfect. Like, that's a really good summation of my philosophy on movement in general, but also helping people be empowered, because like, you're empowered when you know the truth about your own body and how it works, right? You're empowered to find other people and also tell them, community, right? And do movement with them. And it takes away the fear. Like, if you go on a hike with a bunch of people versus go by yourself, like, which is more fun? Bunch of people, right? Obviously, it's a shared experience. It's a human condition. We like to do things with other people and tell other people and have them be part of our lives. And it's typically fear that keeps us from that, which is very interesting. But then the play aspect is just like, or fun aspect, like, you literally have to have fun to sustain your life and to enjoy your life. Because if you're so serious about like, okay, move, okay, breathe, do this, squat perfectly, oh, I did it wrong. Like the self-deprecation about movement and how we feel, how our body looks, right? I heard a podcast host say our bodies are for living, not for looking. And I love that, because often the emphasis is on aesthetics. And it doesn't matter how we move, it's how we look, right? Like, people are are thinking that or feeling that, but it's the opposite. It's how we
Yeah.
move, how we live. If your body is strong and can pack a like 30-pound toddler up a mountain, like doesn't matter how you look, like that's significant. That's pretty
Mhm.
badass. And that's important to be able to go on a hike with a bunch of other mom friends, or
Mhm.
like the older adult population. We know that if they live in community with others, they have better quality of life.
Yeah.
Right. And if you have other people who are pushing you and encouraging you to hike that mountain, and just use that as an example, right? Like, or go and do that activity, go do a dance class or go do a whatever,
Mhm.
then it's way more fun. That community is really important for quality of life. So,
Yeah.
I guess all of that to say, I just agree with, I agree with those. And I feel like they're a really good summation of how I view life and movement. And like, it doesn't have to be strict. It doesn't have to be serious. That's how I used to teach. I used to
Mhm.
teach Pilates. I was taught to like cue every single inhale and exhale and get
Mhm.
frustrated if somebody exhaled at the wrong time when you were supposed to be inhaling.
Yep.
And it
Yes.
was like, move a centimeter. And if you don't move a centimeter, that's wrong and
Yep.
bad. Like putting
Yes.
that objective, like it's wrong or bad versus see how that feels in your own body.
Yeah.
And if it feels wrong to you, then change it. Or like
Yeah.
like the transition of my own self in cueing other people in exercise, what is like putting myself as the expert and saying how they should move versus I've transitioned to putting them as the expert and just guiding them and encouraging them to listen to their own body. And I think that's like that right there is key.
Yeah.
It's like so important. So
Yeah.
yeah, I could talk about
That's
this for days, but
I know that was a great, like one of the things about truth, fun, and community and everything that you just said, and I haven't always lived like this, but as each year goes by and I get older,
Mhm.
I realize, and I listen to teachers, and talk about like, our bodies, we just show them so little appreciation, and then I love that what you were saying about what you heard on the podcast about our bodies are for living and not looking. And the fact is that like this is our one asset, like our human
Mhm.
body. And when Joe Dispenza is so wonderful, he talks about like our bodies as like an animal, and you would not like treat your dog or say mean things to your dog the way that we do to ourselves internally, and the way that we just
Yeah.
are always like just really slave driving our bodies in a certain way. We're not gentle with them, we don't care for them, and it's like our only opportunity to actually be here on the planet is through these like human little flesh suits that we carry around
Yeah.
with us. And it's so, I'm starting to really, I feel like my body, because I had a lot of joint, all kinds of issues that were like physical, but also made more intense by like the way I talked to myself as an athlete, and the way that
Mm.
what I demanded of myself, which was like, I'm not an elite athlete. I'm a recreational armchair warrior. Like, can we let up a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the truth, fun, and community, and how we are designed to be together, and like we need to encourage each other, and we need to share our
Yeah.
time, and we need to do these things. Um, is just starting to really, I'm starting to feel like I'm starting to actually live this in my body more than like, yeah, that sounds great, but it's probably for other people.
That's so
So
important. Yeah.
yeah. So
Wow.
thank you so much, Natalie, for spending time and unpacking all these conversations, because I think they are just so important.
Yeah.
To we do have a digital community, and it is important to share and just encourage each other. So
Yeah. Thank you for having me back.
yes, well, we will do it again.
All right.
Okay, thank you for joining us, and we will see you the next time I have the pleasure to talk with Natalie. Ciao for now, everyone.